The secrets behind each of the locations of Ashes of the Damned have been revealed. In the new Black Ops 7 Zombies blog, Trek gave us a brief description of each point of interest inside of Ashes of the Damned. And inside these descriptions, we are given two dates. One date is when the location was constructed. The other is the day the location arrived inside of the Dark Ether. We can take both of these dates together, combined with what we've discussed prior about these locations in my past videos, and draw some pretty clear conclusions about what they were, why they are here, and what we might need to do at them come Ashes of the Damned's main Easter egg quest. So in this video, let's take a look at the bios Trek gave for each location, and do some theory crafting to solve these secrets. We will start with the easiest to discuss and dissect, as well as the first location Trek wrote about in the blog, Janus Towers Plaza. Described as a research stronghold in Liberty Falls, built in 1989, arrived in the Dark Ether in 1991. A triple-towered superstructure violently crashed into a warped and hostile dimension. One tower has collapsed completely, while electricity sparks and crackles from severed power lines, arcing into the oppressive skies. Janus Towers is probably the easiest to figure out of any of the points of interest, but this is good as it allows us to set up rules for how this will likely work across every location. The first date, 1989, is of course a reference to when Richthofen and Project Janus showed up in Liberty Falls and began construction on the Janus Towers using the leftovers of the nuclear power plant. We know the plant was likely abandoned at the time thanks to Samuel Colton causing many of the plant's workers to die with his poor ownership and greed. This meant the cover story of a leak at the plant was believable to nearby residents for the most part, and allowed Project Janus to move in and take over. There has been some debate surrounding the date, but it's clearly in reference to when Project Janus took over the facility, not when it was initially built. From here, we learn the Towers Plaza was thrown into the Dark Ether in 1991. This is almost certainly because of the events of a Reckoning, the activation of the Sentinel artifact. While we don't know which ending is canon yet, either way, the Sentinel artifact was activated, and this likely did unknowable damage to the dimensional veil at this location where it was already weak, thus pulling the tower into the realm post-ending cutscene that appears off-screen. This was actually alluded to in the intel of the game right from launch in Liberty Falls, that Reckoning, Doomsday, was coming to the site. And whilst that scale is not represented in the atmosphere of Reckoning, it is in the lore. This lets us establish why both these dates will be important for each point of interest. The dates they were constructed were likely chosen to explain why they ended up where they are, and to sow the seeds for their eventual downfall, with the date of the fall into the Dark Ether likely pointing to a single tragic event that threw the location across the veil. If it gets pulled in though, what the hell happens to Richthofen and his family? Probably something we're not really supposed to think about. This does bring to mind an additional question we don't really have the answer for yet, but I'd like to bring up so we all have it in mind. When these locations are thrown into the Dark Ether, are they still in the real world? We definitely have evidence that suggests both outcomes, maybe in different instances. In places like D Machine, when the veil is weak, the other side in the Dark Ether becomes an exact copy of the earthly location. But in all of the marketing surrounding Ashes of the Damned, Trek continually imply lost things end up here. Lost seems to suggest these locations are wrenched from the real world, taking them to the Dark Ether and not copying them. It also provides an excellent way for Trek to clean up the real world timeline of evidence of the Dark Ether by pulling all of the Janus stuff inside of Liberty Falls deep into the Dark Ether. Trek also implied in the intel drops that yes, the Janus Towers get pulled into the Dark Ether. I'll play a clip of that now.
Ashes of the Damned is huge.
It is the darkest and creepiest map we've made, and it's just terrifying and surreal, and it's a nightmare.
When you first come in, you are in a crashed Janus Towers that has fallen into the Dark Ether.
Vandorn Farm is described as a rural farm settlement built in 1920, arrived in the Dark Ether in 1986, a once idyllic homestead, now a horrific memory of one family's descent into madness and ritualistic terror. Vandorn Farm began as a rural settlement in 1920, likely set in this time to embody the post-World War I agriculture expansion in the American Midwest. This generational homestead probably passed down through family lines to represent self-sufficiency during a time of economic recovery, with initial prosperity from crop overproduction and mechanization like tractors. Over decades, the farm may have transformed from an idyllic retreat into a site of ritualistic terror, marked by hanging bodies and a subterranean kill bunker housing a whispering demonic cube. The descent into madness is likely to have culminated in 1986, when the awful murders by the latest generation probably triggered its arrival in the Dark Ether, turning the once vibrant land into a horrific memory of familial breakdown. But what would cause this? Historical records suggest farms like Vandorn emerged amid government-supported farming booms after the war, encouraging small operations in regions such as Iowa or Minnesota focused on corn and dairy production. Borrowed funds for equipment probably set the stage for future debts, as market volatility and soil erosion plagued these heirloom properties during these years. By the 1980s, inherited debts likely amplified isolation, fostering environments ripe for psychological strain. The 1986 pull is likely to align with the farm crisis peak, where collapsing incomes led to desperate acts like the Dale Burr murders in Iowa, involving a stressed farmer's rampage against bankers and family. Similar events, including the Ruthton killings in Minnesota over foreclosures, probably mirror the ritualistic horrors, blending financial ruin with Satanic Panic era delusions of occult influences. The Satanic Panic era influences likely build to the conspiracy surrounding the ritualistic, demonic, fleshy cube placed on a pedestal in the family's kill bunker. These tragedies suggest the cube's whispers drove the family over the edge into a life of murder and sacrifice, trying to please demonic masters from the Dark Ether, in a time when most farms in the US were financially suffering and the family was desperate to find a way to get by. This is the first example of many of what seems to be the Faustian deals with demonic entities in the Dark Ether at the cost of other lives we will see across all, or at least some, of these points of interest. Blackwater Lake, a cabin by frozen lake built in 1940, arrived in the Dark Ether in the 1950s. Tormented phantoms and a drowning in the dark waters, a single act of horror is remembered across an afterlife of guilt. Built in 1940, when the director, Dean Roth, first made the deal, and 1950 was when the veil got too thin from horrors there, likely related to Hitchcock/American Psycho in themes. Proper Faustian deal with this entity cost him everything. We now know these dates for Blackwater Lake, built in 1940 and arrived in the Dark Ether in the 1950s, which adds even more layers to this theory. We already learned a ton about it before. It's a cabin by the frozen lake that served as a secluded retreat, inhabited by a horror movie director who made a Faustian deal with a dark entity, leading to the ritualistic drowning of his lead actress amid tormented phantoms and a single act of horror remembered across an afterlife of guilt. We discussed all of this in a prior video you can check out, linked on screen and in the description if you want to after this one, but we'll summarize the key information here in case you haven't seen it. The point of interest notably features a power switch like those in Infinite Warfare Zombies, and areas that seem to remake locations from Raven the Redwood, like the boating dock, all pointing to Willard Wyler's influence. Plus, the current announcer voice seems to sound similar to that of Mephistopheles. But ultimately, this does not shift our theory that this location features a Trek reimagining of Willard Wyler that may ultimately bring Mephistopheles back into the Dark Ether storyline. This only shows us that the Trek version of the character is less modern and a more genuine retelling of Force, with the director, Dean Roth, likely being inspired by Alfred Hitchcock, judging by the dates place here. But rather than just the film Psycho, this is now a director who, thanks to his demonic deal with Mephistopheles, has created the entire horror genre an entire decade earlier than Psycho would have released. And how would someone in this time create such genuine horror films without special effects? Quite simply with the help of his demonic dark ether partner, using dark ether magic to genuinely murder actors in the movies, just like Willard Wyler. Perhaps most importantly, Ashwood, a frontier town built in 1820, arrived in the Dark Ether in 1865, a frontier town sunken into a rift, overrun, and its inhabitants massacred in a war of a bygone era. The dead are more than memories here. Ashwood is likely to have originated as a frontier town in 1820, established in the wake of the Missouri Compromise to serve as a neutral trading hub amid westward expansion. This settlement probably grew into a modest community with saloons and farms, but escalating Civil War tensions may have overwhelmed it by 1865. This deliberate dating of 1865 suggests an obvious connection to the Civil War, and this is only more heavily implied by the Grey Voices, the Warden's appearance in the intro cutscene to Ashes of the Damned, where much of his outfit getup is Civil War era. A massacre during wartime horrors is likely to have sunk the town into a rift, pulling it into the Dark Ether, where overrun inhabitants become more than memories, their dead forms persisting in an unending bygone conflict. Towns like Ashwood probably formed along trails such as the Santa Fe route, driven by fur trade and agriculture in regions like Missouri, balancing slave and free interests under the Compromise. Neutrality likely masked underlying divisions, setting foundations for later strife. Missouri would also make sense as a location of origin if the town was relatively neutral in the Civil War at the beginning. The Missouri Compromise had just been signed in 1820, which made Missouri a slave state but allowed Maine to become a free state. This meant that the lines between free states and slave states now essentially split the country between the North and South, setting the stage for the Civil War soon to come in America. The 1865 arrival probably connects to post-Civil War chaos, including raids like the sack of Julesburg in retaliation for Sand Creek, where warriors burned settlements in vengeance. Events such as the Plaza Bridge battles and guerrilla violence in Missouri likely amplified massacres, tearing open dimensional scars through unresolved bloodshed. These tragedies position Ashwood's rift as cosmic retribution for era's sins, especially if this town sat in Missouri. This would sit it as a prime town to be raided and ransacked during Civil War vengeance strikes, and likely be the explanation for the massacre we had heard about. The location of Missouri would also fit with the Warden's southern accent, meaning this could be where he is from, and could these events play into his motivations for power? Exit 115 is a roadside stop built between 1950 to 1980, arrived in the Dark Ether in 1989. Once thriving, this rest stop and crumbling freeway overpass was torn from its original location. There are faint echoes of a doomed confrontation. Only desperation and betrayal remain. Exit 115 is likely to have deployed as a roadside stop between 1950 and 1980, part of the interstate highway system's expansion to support post-war travel. This thriving rest area with a diner and overpass probably catered to drivers, but a doomed confrontation in 1989 tore it from reality into the Dark Ether. This 1950s setting also makes sense with the visual aesthetics of a 50s diner, rather than a retro-futuristic location built in the future like Green Run's Transit. This seems entirely unrelated to that. Facilities like this probably arose under President Eisenhower's infrastructure push, providing amenities along routes like 1 to 80 for mobility and defense needs as cars became more and more dominant in society. The era's car culture likely sustained such stops as essential waypoints. The 1989 pull probably reflects highway dangers, as funding supporting this infrastructure push dried up, as many of these once bustling locations became nearly abandoned, beginning to rot and dry up as business slowed to a crawl. This turned them into shady locales, likely setting the stage for whatever confrontation took place here. Perhaps a mob hit, or simply a fight between two diner goers that went too far. Drunk? The usage of the word betrayal suggests that whoever ended up spilling blood here likely did so with someone they already knew. the Zarya Cosmodrome, a Soviet-era launch facility built in 1960, arrived in the dark ether in 1968. Those hearing voices before reaching this world now speak of betrayal, sabotage, and scientific hubris. Greed and darker influences have prevented an ascension. It is worth noting here, whilst this is supposed to be a thematic follow-up to Ascension from an alternative time, the map seems to be more in line with a launch remake, which is what Ascension is based on off of the campaign level that it too is based on anyways. But storyline wise, it's essentially going to be the same place with some altered history. With that in mind, Zarya Cosmodrome has been officially confirmed by Trek across their blogs as a Soviet-era launch facility built in 1960 that arrived in the dark ether in 1968. The blog states that those hearing voices before reaching this world now speak of betrayal, sabotage, and scientific hubris, with greed and darker influences having prevented an ascension. Voices of betrayal and sabotage likely haunt the site, pulling it into the dark ether in 1968. Darker influences likely perpetuate the failing, turning ambition into eternal regret. Sites like this, during 1960, officially expanded from Baikonur for programs under Khrushchev, symbolizing communist progress in rocketry. Rivalry with the US likely drove rapid development, with facilities designed for Vostok and Soyuz missions that pushed the boundaries of human spaceflight amid intense political pressure to outpace American achievements like the Mercury program. Our speculation on the 1968 arrival links to Yuri Gagarin's plane crash on March 27, 1968, amid conspiracy theories of deliberate killing to avoid space failure risks. Officially, Gagarin, the first human in space from his 1961 Vostok 1 flight, died alongside instructor Vladimir Sergin when their MiG-15 UTI jet crashed during a routine training exercise near Kursk, Russia. Apologies for all of the terrible pronunciations. Initial Soviet reports cited bad weather or a bird strike, but later investigations in the 1980s pointed to a pilot error or an evasive maneuver to avoid a weather balloon. However, the crash's circumstances fueled persistent speculation due to the Soviet Union's secrecy, with declassified documents from 2011 revealing potential causes like a sudden cabin pressure drop or interface from another aircraft's sonic boom. Conspiracy theories abound, including claims that Leonid Brezhnev or the KGB orchestrated the death out of jealousy over Gagarin's fame, or to silence his criticisms of the space program's safety flaws. One prominent theory, explored in the book Starman by Jamie Doran and Piers Bisoni, suggests a cover-up where Gagarin's jet was disrupted by an unauthorized Su-15 fighter flying too close, causing a fatal spin, and that officials hid this to protect the military's reputation. Another angle posits that Gagarin was barred from further spaceflights after 1961 to preserve his heroic image, as Soviet leaders feared turning the first man in space into the first to die there, especially after near-fatal incidents like Vladimir Komarov's 1967 Soyuz 1 crash. Some theories even tie the crash to broader lost cosmonaut conspiracies, alleging hidden failed missions before Gagarin's success, though most such claims have been debunked as hoaxes or misinterpretations of radio transmissions. In the context of Zarya, these elements suggest the Cosmodrome as a planning ground for such a murder, where the year and descriptions of a betrayal preventing an ascension seem to suggest this location is where it was decided to stop Yuri Gagarin from returning to space. This could in fact be the reason we are seeing Yuri Zavoysky from Ascension return, as seen in the teasers, and heard in a radio transmission, where he potentially is pulled into the realm, seeing the frozen rockets, and may end up perishing here. In the Trek Zombies narrative, he could be taking the place of Yuri Gagarin here, flipped with his real-world counterpart sharing the same first name, pleasing both the Ether fans and real-world lore fanatics. We may see that in this alternative timeline, Yuri Zavoysky was set to go to space and was instead killed, in much the same fashion as Gagarin. This act of betrayal and murder is likely what drove the place into the dark ether in the first place. ultimately we now have a much better idea of where these locations come from, what tragedies brought them to the Dark Ether, and most importantly, what that will mean when we visit them in Ashes of the Damned. But I am left with a lingering realization after studying each of these location bios. Each of them gives us a very specific year for each of these locations in terms of the year they arrived in the Dark Ether, and not what year it was in their specific timelines when they were pulled in. This seems to suggest that each of these locations came from a single timeline, and likely the only timeline to still exist, the same one that Requiem was just pulled from. This would not only mean the Warden was a resident of the same timeline as the rest of the characters in the Dark Ether so far, originally, but also that the current theories about the multiverse having returned due to the central artifact being activated may not actually be the case, as alternate versions of all of the beloved characters we experience in the Ether story may exist in new forms in this new singular world. As to where the original crew are from though, we will have to find that out. But let me know your thoughts on all of these ideas down below. All of this definitely seems to be suggesting that each of these locations will be very important in the main quest, and there'll probably be at least something or an item to collect from each as we progress through. Did I miss anything researching these times for their locations? Do you think there is a multiverse in spite of the way the timeline is described here? Or do you think there's still just a singular universe? Or do you think a multiverse is returning but it just hasn't happened yet and it may come the end of the game? Because we know that the Warden apparently wants to restore the multiverse, which seems to suggest it is not, or at least not fully restored yet. Maybe only pockets from it are starting to bloom, but not its entirety. Anyways, it's not long now until launch and we will finally get the answers to all of this. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe if you're not for latest and great Call of Duty news information. So anyways, thank you for watching and bye. To conclude this video, I want to shout out the fact that I finally decided to make a Patreon and Cameo account, both of which will be linked below if you want to help support the channel. On Patreon, you can sign up for the lowest tier of just $1.50 a month to get exclusive access for my Discord, where we can discuss zombies lore, trivia, or whatever you desire. A place where you lot, my community, can better connect. Your names will also appear at the end of videos thanking you. For $5.50 a month, you get all of that, and I will be doing exclusive monthly Q&As. And for $16.50 a month, you again get all of that, and I will be doing exclusive lore videos, such as unpacking niche parts of the Treyarch documents I've been breaking down on my channel that don't as much suit a main channel video. For the highest tier, only for those with the ability to and who really want to help out the channel, you get special bonuses I've yet to determine and verbal shoutouts at the end of every video. Over on Cameo, I can do funny videos reading lines from zombies, memes like how do we tell him, birthday wishes for friends or family, or whatever else you desire, practically anything. Of course, none of this is necessary, just watching and enjoying the videos helps me immensely and I greatly appreciate it. However, I think it's about time I start setting up additional revenue streams because Zombies' popularity is tumultuous and always goes through ups and downs. As I'm sure you've lately seen on the channel, viewership is down a lot. We go through big highs when new games release, but then during these drought periods, I need more income stability so I don't have to worry as much about it and I can focus more on improving the quality of the content. My highest quality videos are not always the ones that best please YouTube algorithms, so instead, this way I can produce my best work knowing I don't have to think as much about how well the content's going to perform. So if you'd like to support me on Patreon for exclusive content or would like a simple Cameo message, you can do so to further support me via the links below, but only if you can afford it and you actually want to help me. Don't feel like you are forced to, don't worry, I'll survive. It would just help relieve some of the pressure during inconsistent periods on the channel, so I don't have to solely rely on AdSense revenue and still maintain the sheer quantity and quality of content that I put out. Obviously I pump out literally a boatload of content and some of these are absolutely crazy projects over hour-long videos, so it's a lot on my plate, especially when these videos don't perform particularly well. And I've not been doing many sponsorships lately to help supplement revenue either, so it would greatly help. Thank you for any generous person once again who does kindly support the channel. It means the absolute world and will really help keep this boat afloat.